Today is November 13th, 2013. My name is Joe Todd, and this is an interview with Steve Forsythe in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Sir, where were you born?
In Neodesha, Kansas.
Neodesha, Kansas. When's your birthday?
12/25/1944.
Who was your father?
C.W. Bill Forsythe.
And your mother?
Petrina, P-E-T-R-E-N-A.
What was her maiden name?
Addington, A-D-D-I-N-G-T-O-N.
Did you go through school in Neodesha?
No, that was where the county hospital was. I went to school in Altoona, and then we moved later. I went the rest of my school in Fredonia, Kansas. Fredonia.
You graduated what year?
1962.
1962. In your schooling, who was your favorite teacher?
My favorite teacher would have been probably Mrs. Vandiver.
Why was she your favorite?
Because she was English teacher, and she also then taught another class called Senior English, and she encouraged me to write essays and things like that, and also berated me because I didn't want to diagram sentences. And she was frustrated because I could write well, but I didn't care about the grammar. But she was a good person.
Okay. How large was Fredonia in those years?
I'd think about 4,000 then. That's my recollection.
What'd you do for recreation?
As a child?
Yes.
You mean as a teenager or?
When you were in high school?
Oh, in high school. Well, let's see. Fredonia still has a square, and if you had wheels, you get the buddies, and you just drive around the square. And some people go one way, and some people go the other, and you just drive around the square. Go to the drive-in movie in the summer. That's about the size of it. There was a teen town. I forgot there was a teen town where they had dances.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many movie theaters were in Fredonia in those years?
One.
One. What was the name of it?
I have no recollection of that. I don't know. I can't remember.
Oh, how often would you go to the movies?
Oh, let's see. Well, the summer when they had the drive-ins, we go probably every Saturday night, and then downtown movie theater maybe once a month or something like that. I don't remember. When I was a teenager, I went more often.
Okay. Now, in the movie, they had the color cartoon and News of the World.
That's right. Yeah.
What was going on in the world at that time when you were in high school?
Let's see, the 60s. Well, there was something just reminded me the other day. There was the Cuban conflict, of course, and that was late 60s, 62, I guess. But in the early 50s and 60s, I can't really remember. I guess there was, let me think. I don't remember the news that much, what it was. Well, I remember that, I remember as a young man when Eisenhower got elected president, but that was like when I was in first or second grade. And then but later on, I guess the presidents that got elected, Kennedy then, I don't remember.
Okay. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Well, I do, and I'm refreshed on it because I saw a thing on PBS the other night about.
What do you think about that with the missiles in Cuba?
You know, that's funny. I remarked to my wife that I thought I don't remember that being a big deal. I mean, it was 62. I was 17, just out of high school. Well, I don't even remember what time of year it happened, but I remember not knowing a lot about it, except there was, it was kind of scary to know that they had the potential. It turns out they had a lot of potential, but I didn't know. I watched on TV the other night. It was just kind of like, oh, that's a good thing. You're 17. You don't get too excited about world events. You're thinking about other stuff.
Yes.
Unfortunately, or I guess.
Yeah. What were the main stores in Fredonia in those years?
Oh, at that time, 50s, 60s, around that square I was talking about, it was pretty well full of stores. I mean, they were pretty well occupied. There was a rationale hardware store with, you could go buy stuff for your car, and there was there was 2 or 3 banks and Pennies, J.C. Penney's, and two drug stores. One of them one of them where you could go get a soda, and the other one was just strictly pharmacy, and just the usual things. It was a pretty lively place, and they had like, I can't remember which night of the week, but they'd have special shopping, and most it was a farming community. Well, they did have a cement plant there. That was one of the main employments other than agriculture. But I want to say on Tuesday night, they'd have special hours, and the farmers would go in and shop and do that kind of thing. And so,
What grocery stores did you shop in Fredonia?
Food town.
Food Town.
Yep.
Why Food Town?
I don't know. And we kind of went where my mom went, of course, and they liked the manager, whose name was Curly. I don't know any. I can envision him, but he was just a real friendly guy, and I don't know. That's just where we went, and that was. I guess I don't even know if there was another store, to be honest about it. I never went to it if there was.
When did you get your first car?
In about my junior year, as soon as I would have been 16, I guess, I got one probably.
What kind of car was it?
50 Chevrolet, 1950 Chevrolet, four-door sedan. And then got it painted, different color. It was bomber brown or whatever those old ugly colors. Had to have it painted a different color. Did some other things to it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I know back in the late 50s, early 60s, civil defense was a big thing in this country.
Yeah.
Did you have any civil defense people in Fredonia?
Boy, if we were, I didn't know about it. Okay. I mean, there probably were somebody. I don't know. I never ever was aware of that. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like on the farm, go to school, come home on the farm. That's pretty much it.
Now, did you live in Fredonia?
No, I lived on a farm east of Fredonia.
What chores you do on the farm?
What chores?
Yes.
Well, it was a I guess you'd call it a diversified farm. So you had milk. We had a milk cow herd, and so that was a main job that boys had. I was one of 4 boys, so Dad had a kind of a good labor force, and so we had milk cows, and we had beef cattle, and we had hogs, and then we raised crops for cash like wheat, and then some of the other crops we raised for the animals we made into feed for the animals. So it was pretty much a little bit of everything. We didn't have sheep, but we had just all the other things. So you had a lot to do in the winter to keep them fed, when there wasn't any grass, give them hay and all that. It's hard work.
Mm-hmm. What crops did you raise on the farm?
Well, wheat and milo and corn, mostly corn for either for silage or for the grain, and the milo is for grain, and then later on soybeans for cash, and of course alfalfa for the hay and native hay, which you didn't raise it just grew, and that's pretty much it, I think. Yeah.
Did you go on wheat harvest?
I never went out of Wilson County.
Okay.
I mean, we would, when we got our harvest done, we sometimes, when Dad had a more plentiful help, like myself, people drive trucks, and we would do other people's harvest for them for a price. But we never went very far. Okay. I mean, we never went further than we could drive the combine. We didn't have the capability to load it up and haul it.
Now, what did you do during wheat harvest?
Well, when I was littler, I would drive a tractor with, I started probably driving a tractor when I was about 10, and so you could drive the tractor with a grain on it, and then you got to where you could drive the truck, and then you got to where you could drive the truck to town, as soon as you had a license, and then somewhere in there, I learned to drive the combine, and so that's what I did probably for, 2 or 3 years or more.
Okay. Where was the elevator?
Fredonia. There were more than one there. Well, actually, no, that's not true. There was one east. There was one 3 miles east in Altoona. There was a railroad track there, and they were all associated with railroad tracks naturally. And there was 2 there at first, and then they kind of consolidated, and then they built a great big one over in Fredonia. So that's kind of where everybody went. And
okay.
so it was. There was, of course, railroad over there too, also.
What was the price of wheat in those days?
Huh. I don't know. I want to say, I don't remember.
Okay.
Somehow $5, something sticks in my head, but I don't know. That could be way off.
Okay.
I don't know.
What did you do after high school?
Went to junior college in Independence, Kansas.
What did you study?
What did I study?
Mhm.
Well, I just took general courses to go on to college because I didn't really know what I wanted to major in, so it was a good thing because it was, you know, it was a nice little school. It was 30 miles from my home, and so I'd stay down there during the week and go home on weekends and help with the farm. And so I just took, you know, basic spread of things, chemistry and algebra and I don't know, zoology and that sort of thing. And I don't think I declared my major yet, or I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I got 2 years under my belt there, and then went to K-State
Okay.
and did major there in wildlife biology, and did graduate. And so that was kind of my college deal. It took me, in those days, there was, of course, a draft going on, and so people my age men were registered, and all people were getting called up for the draft right and left. And so I actually spent 5 years. I spent 3 years at K-State for a couple of reasons. I wasn't in a hurry to graduate because I knew I'd get drafted, and I also extended another semester. I couldn't have gotten done anyway. Quite. I lost a few credits when I transferred, and so I spent an extra semester. My draft board said that would be it, and got my teaching information, but I never did do practice teaching. So because I wanted to fall back, because sometimes there weren't jobs in wildlife biology, but some of my friends got jobs teaching. But I never did quite get that extra
Okay.
part done, so I never have taught.
And you got your degree what year?
1967.
1967.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where were you when Kennedy was assassinated?
I was sitting in the restaurant where I worked in Independence, Kansas during the noon hour. I'll never forget this. Of course, most everybody wouldn't forget where they were, I wouldn't think. And the news came on. We were taking a break. Myself and the other kitchen help. I was a busboy. And we were sitting around this big table in the back having lunch. And that's when somebody came in and heard it on the news. And you know, just everybody was like, it was amazing. It was horrible. It was just amazing. I remember distinctly when I grew up, I was not associated with hardly any black people in Wilson County, Kansas. So when I went to Independence, there were more black people there. And then with kitchen help, there were black people. And a couple of women just burst out in tears because he was very popular with black people. And I didn't quite understand all that. But anyway, I remember that very well. It's a very sad time.
So what did you think when Johnson took over?
Well, I didn't think anything. I just figured, well, that was his job. You know, he's the vice president. So that's what he's supposed to do, step up. And that's what he, of course, did. So I didn't have any idea, you know, about what I've learned about him since, about, you know, being a really different person and a really great, depends on your view, I guess, politician, but, you know, the kind of guy that got things done however it needed to get done. But, you know, you didn't know those things. You just knew, all I knew was vice president, and all of a sudden, voila, he's president.
Now, at K-State, were you aware of Vietnam?
Yeah, yes. By then, I went to K-State in 64, I guess. Yeah, fall of 64. By then, it was heating up. And, of course, there were a few people that young males that didn't stay in college and didn't have some other kind of deferment got drafted, and a lot of them went to Vietnam. A few, by the time I graduated in 67, a few had come back, and you were telling stories, and I remember this one guy was at the student union was protesting it sort of by himself, and it was really vilified, you know, it was made a lot of fun of for even having the nerve to, and he was a veteran, he'd been there, and he was just speaking out against it, that it was very bad, you know, it was a bad thing and you shouldn't do it, and everybody was, you know, it's not patriotic to do that and all that stuff. So I'll never forget. I didn't know the guy, don't know anything more about him. Little did we know there'd be a lot more demonstrations. Yeah.
Do you recall the Gulf of Tonkin incident?
Somewhat. I have to say it's faded on me some, but I remember it being pretty significant, and some presidential decisions had to be made, and I can't really remember much more about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
What'd you do after you got your degree?
Well, that's when the draft board said, okay, get 1A, dude, or whatever they said. And so I went, well, I, coming from the junior college where they didn't have ROTC, and when I could have gotten in ROTC when I got to K-State, but I was not going to have anything to do with that military stuff. That's just how you are when you're that age, I guess. So I didn't have ROTC working for me, so here I am graduating. So I went to see the recruiters, and I ended up with the Army offering me what I thought was the best deal, which was, oh, no problem, young man. If I wanted to use my degree in biology or wildlife biology, and they said, no problem. We can get you right in the chemical corps. They have biology and chemical things, and you've got all this background. You should fit right in. And so I said, oh, cool, So I signed up. You got to go to OCS. To get there, you got to go through basic training and advanced infantry training, and then but when you get it, and you go to infantry OCS, but when you get your commission, it'll be in chemical corps. Sound good to me. You probably know what's going to happen here, don't you? So, so I did. That's what I signed up for. I enlisted, and I enlisted in the spring, right shortly after I graduated. Then they gave me a 120-day delayed entry deferment or something. So I didn't actually go in and get on the plane and go to basic training till the fall of '67.
Fall of '67.
Yeah.
When did you go on active duty? Do you recall the date?
Well, not counting, see, I was on delayed, I guess I'd have been in active duty 120 days prior to October of '67, but I actually became activated in October of '67, but I don't remember the date.
Okay.
I've got it on my
Okay.
1462
Yes.
or whatever, DD 416, that's what it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where'd you go for basic training?
Fort Dix, New Jersey, of all places. Got on first time I ever flew in a big plane up to out of Kansas City.
Was that your first flight?
My first, I believe it was. First commercial for sure. I don't think I'd even been in a little fixed wing then ever.
What did you think taking your first flight?
I was pretty spooky, I was scared. There was a couple of guys, I don't remember how we ran into how we knew. There were two other guys from the Kansas City area that were going the same place I was, going to Fort Dix to go through that, to go to OCS, and all three did, but three of us did. But one of them had flown, so he was like the expert, and so, we just, the other two of us just did whatever he told us, kind of like, be careful and whatever. I don't remember. It was pretty spooky.
Did they tell you why they sent you to Fort Dix?
No, it's the Army. You don't know why you go.
Well, they had
places.
basic training posts closer.
I know. I never could figure that one out.
Yeah.
It was certainly a different experience. So maybe they wanted me to learn more about my brethren from the East Coast, which I certainly did.
So tell me about basic.
Well, it was in the fall in Fort Dix, and I imagine all basic trainings are about the other. But I remember, you remember when you start thinking about these things, you remember lots of stuff. I've written some stories about it that just from my family, but I remember the first thing you do, you go in the reception center, which is, in the middle of the night, of course, when you get there, and you don't know where you're tired, you're like a lost, you and everybody else all looking around, you don't know what's going on. Then they throw clothes at you and they put you in a barracks, and then the next morning they wake you up, I think. I can't remember exactly, but anyway, then you had your shots pretty quick, which was a brutal thing because they ran you all through there and shot you in both arms, and that's when you begin to understand. At least for me, you're just a piece of walking humanity, and respect is not anything you get. So you just go through there, go back to the barracks. Some boys had reactions to the shots. I mean, it was pretty serious, shaking and they were crying and wanting their mama, lots of stuff. There was all kinds of homesickness. The very next morning after our shots, at like 3 o'clock a.m., they got us up and put us on KP. Most of us were sick, and that was an awful experience too. That was my first experience at KP. That's probably all happened in like 3 days. And then you I think after about 3 or 4 days, you go to a unit, and then it really starts, But it was very equalizing. And there were a lot of people from cultures, I mean, they're all United States citizens, but there were people that I'd never been around. Black guys, Puerto Rican guys, Irish guys from the block, because most of the people there were from that part of the country. Camden, New Jersey, Harlem, and then there's myself, two guys from Kansas, and a few Texans. Boy, were we were just like, what in the world is going on here? It was amazing. You learn some things to say and not to say. You never wanted to don't mention your college graduate. I did that one time, and they treat you like a dummy, and so you don't do that again. You don't try to keep a low profile. That's what I learned.
I didn't ask, where was the recruiter located when you joined?
Manhattan, Kansas,
Manhattan,
where
Kansas.
Cage
Okay,
State was.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. So what type of training did you have in basic?
Well, pretty much physical training was, you had to learn to they're getting in shape. So you did a lot of marching and a lot of running, marching in formation. I mean, running in formation, marching in formation, and all that stuff. And a lot of, to go to the chow line, you had to go, depending on how much, you had to go through the overhead bars and do push-ups and that sort of thing. Then you had to do those the rest of the time. You had a formal PT thing, and you learned to fire a weapon, which was M14s then, I think, yeah, and see if you could hit whatever you could hit down range, not like one guy did the tower, which was very exciting for a lot of people, but. Anyway, so you get your little marksman badge, depending on how good or bad you did.
Or did you fire?
I think I was expert.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the best one?
Yes.
The top? I think I was. I fired, rifles, squirrel hunting and stuff at home, I guess, and I did pretty well at that. And let's see. There's some classes on just, you had to learn how to drill and salute and march and all that stuff. So pretty much that's what I remember.
What's your most vivid memory of basic training?
Basic training?
Yes.
I'll tell you. It was the first time the second time, after the KPE experience at the reception center, and I don't remember much about it except it was just terrible. But then the next one in basic, or one of them in basic, but the first thing I got was the outside guy, which had to wash all the pots and pans was bad. I had that once. And the outside man, you had to clean up the grease pit. And it's cool. It's wintertime, or it's fall. It's brutal. I mean, it's like there's no way you come out of that not just nasty. So I learned when I got further along in my training, I learned you had to go to KP. That was not an option. The best thing to do was get first in line, because the first person in line got the choice of where he wanted to go. So I would pay the guy that woke us up in the middle of the night to go to KP a couple of bucks, so he'd pick me up, get me first, and I'd get in the first in line. And I learned, the best job was cook's helper, because it was warm, not dirty, and you get extra food to eat. And I was always hungry, so I ate pretty good.
Yeah. Tell me about bivouac.
Bivouac. Okay, so we did do that in basic, actually. So you get these little tents, a shelter house, which is if you put two together, make a whole tent like that, and snap together. So you put two guys in there, sleeping bags, and you're out there. You march out there, and that's got its own sense. It's fairly heavy, not really heavy, but it seemed like a lot. And you march out there, and then they tell you to put up your tent and harass you severely. And then you go to sleep. In the middle of the night, they throw gas. And I have this great memory of this big black guy we called Big Daddy, because he was a big guy and he had children. And he jumped up, of course, he forgot the basic what he'd been taught was to put on your gas mask. He jumps up in the middle of the shelter half, up through the top of it, and takes off running with the shelter half behind him, hollering, I'm dying, I swear, good Lord, I'm going to die. And so anyway, he didn't though. But he, we were exposed to, this is tear gas, we were exposed to tear gas in a place so we'd know what it was, so we'd appreciate it. It was a good idea to put your mask on, which of course it was. But anyway, that was pretty exciting. In the middle of the dark, he's running trees. It was like, oh my gosh. Anyway, the rest of us had our masks on. We didn't have anything else to do. We're watching Big Daddy run around in the dark, crashing. Anyway, that's my bivouac memory. I don't remember. Oh, then of course the food, you know, brought it out, and you had immersion heaters to dump your stuff, your stainless steel mess kit stuff. You had to make sure you got it all cleaned off of not so much food, but the soap, because soap on metal was not good for your body next time you ate. Right.
What about your inspections?
Oh, inspections. Well, you had guard mount, and guard mount is a thing that is a formation that you. Well, actually, my most memorable one was in AIT, but they're all the same. So you get out there, and then the most important part about the AIT, if I'm not getting ahead here, or do you want to? Okay, so AIT, Advanced Infantry Training, but you still have all this basic guard mount. So you're guarding important stuff like the. I'm making a joke here, but I mean stuff you wouldn't think needed guarding, but it was training. So you get in this little formation, and people that got selected go to guard, and you're supposed to have everything spiffed up. You're supposed to have your uniform as clean as you could get it pressed. I don't know how you could ever get it pressed, but mostly you had to have your weapon. This would be your M14 clean, and then an officer would come by, some little second lieutenant guy. He'd come by and go up and down the lines, grab your weapon and look it up and down, go through a process. There's a procedure for all that stuff. And if you did really well, you got off a guard mount. If you were the selected of this by the lieutenant, and you were the best pressed, most clean weapon guy on there, then you got to go back to barracks, and you didn't have to do anything that day because you weren't scheduled. You were scheduled to be on guard. So that night, so you were good for a day. This one guy, a Puerto Rican gentleman, who we call Sleepy Gonzalez, that wasn't his real name, his eyes were always, the eyelids were halfway down. So you didn't know if he was awake, or half asleep. In his case, he could be asleep. So once we had guard mount in the winter, it's very cold, and you're standing out there waiting for the lieutenant, and he had his weapon at parade rest and went to sleep, and he had post-nasal drip called URI in those days, upper respiratory infection, and I was right next to him, and so I observed in the time that when we were in the back ranks of the formation, so in the time it took for the lieutenant to get back there, he had fallen asleep and dripped liquid from his nose onto the receiver of the weapon, and it froze because it was so cold. So when the lieutenant got to him, first of all, he had to wake him up. He grabbed the weapon, he looked at it, and he was so disgusted, he threw the weapon down and kicked the guy off guard mount, which meant that Sleepy got to go back to the barracks. The rest of us got to go on guard. This is true. I'm not making this up. So I thought, well, this guy's not so stupid after all. I don't know. Who knows? I always did wonder. He was severely had some severe attention problems, and probably in those days, he probably didn't do well in Vietnam. I don't know that. He may not have gone ever. I don't know.
Tell me about your drill instructors.
They were interesting people. Of course, they wore those round hats, and they were pretty cocky. The young ones, especially the corporals, were, they were just kids, right out of high school, and most of them probably were heading for Vietnam. And then there were the older guys, that'd probably been to Vietnam already by then, but E6s, staff sergeants, and then there was a first sergeant, and they were pretty. Their job was to make you do things and yell at you and get after you, and if you couldn't do enough push-ups, just make fun of you pretty much, and if you were anywhere you were lagging, and so they were pushing you the whole time, and that was their job. And so you didn't necessarily like them, but they weren't necessarily bad people. Some of them were probably a little brutal, but they had some streaks in them. But anyway,
After basic training, where'd you go?
I went back to Fort Dix after the first of the year in 1968, and so I had 2 more months of training, this advanced infantry training, in January, February in Fort Dix. And I thought, coming from the Midwest here in Kansas, that I knew what cold winter was like, but in Fort Dix was cold. The wind was off, I think now. There was a lot more wind than I would have thought there'd have been. Maybe not as much as out here in the Midwest, but certainly the wind was moist coming off the Atlantic, and it was camping out, bivouacking I remember we learned advanced weapon training then, because we were going to learn about the infantry, so M60 machine gun training, and you'd run a belt through, and the spent rounds, the brass would go in the snow and freeze to the snow, and then you always had to pick up all the brass, so you had to take after it was all done, and you had to take your bayonet and go chip all the brass out of the ice, and turn it in so you could go back there. Had to stay in some shelter, some GP mediums, big tents with a lot of guys in them. We stayed out at the range because it was too much. It was way out there someplace, and there was too much trouble to move us back and forth, I guess.
Now, how did AIT compare to basic?
Well, I'd say it was much more intense. For one thing, basic was for everybody, and AIT was for people to be. Many of my fellow AIT guys went to Vietnam from there. So that was their last training, except maybe some in-country stuff, because you weren't being trained for Vietnam. You weren't being trained for jungle fighting or anything like that at Fort Dix, New Jersey, that's for sure. But it was to familiarize you with the weapons. It was much more specific on infantry stuff, tactics and that sort of thing, and different weapons and explosives and radio techniques, and more specificity than you got in basic, which makes sense. It would be.
How long? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I think this was about the time that McNamara's 10,000, if you know what that is, that came where he decided he would lower the qualifications to get into the Army. I think that might have been in place then, because there were some guys in there that really weren't too swift, and they went back to Vietnam, I'm pretty sure. As a matter of fact, I met one of them later, and most of them did. And so anyway, whatever happened. But it was I don't know what the percentage of blacks versus non-blacks, but I'd say it was 50-50 anyway, probably. And that one in my units around there. And that was a whole different sociological experience for Steve Forsythe, I can tell you that.
How long did AIT last?
2 months.
2 months. Mm-hmm. Now, what about this chemical deal that you're supposed to be assigned
Okay, well then I go off. Then I go off to Officers Candidate School, which is in Fort Benning, Georgia, and get down there in must have been spring, March, and it's 6 months. So the whole time and that's fairly intense stuff. Lots more physical stuff and a lot more training. Of course, then they're training you to be an officer, leader, an infantry officer, and but there's a whole bunch of us in there that were college graduates, and we all had this belief, except for a few guys, and I want to say the company was probably 160 men. There were a few guys in there that were okay wanting to be infantry officers, several probably, and there were some guys that were enlisted men had gone to OCS, and they were all wanting to be infantry officers. There was a whole bunch of us that thought we were going to get something else, like chemical corps or quartermaster, or something else, other branches. And so so it was pretty intense training. And the bottom line, I don't think anybody got anything out of that except the infantry branch commission when we graduated. And there might have been a couple of exceptions, but not very many. I certainly wasn't one of them. So then,
when did you get your commission?
When?
Mm-hmm.
In August of 1968. So March, April, May, June, July. Yeah, 6 months. Yeah. So what was I going to say? Yeah. So that was a lot intense, a lot more field work, and then we didn't know it, but you'd be on a field exercise, and they'd tactical officer would turn to you and say, okay, today you're the platoon leader, which if you hadn't been paying attention, it didn't work out too good for you. And particularly, we learned orienteering, in other words, map reading in the woods in Georgia, which are pretty thick, and I actually had to do over on that. I hadn't been paying close attention, and so I got lost in the woods and had to take the training over. It's very good training. It was very good, I think. They had a big classroom there, Fort Benning, and a lot of classroom training. So I guess all things considered, it was probably really top-notch stuff. Somewhere in that training, when we were towards the end, in July, August, out there in the swamps of Georgia, slogging around, and so that we all were equal, except somebody would be put in charge for a day or something. So we're out there walking around in the piney woods and the swamps, and lo and behold, one day we got picked up by helicopters, and it was just like, oh my goodness, you're in this, you get lifted up out of the jungle, or not the jungle there, but the swamps and the piney woods, and as it turned out, these guys had ice cold drinks in a cooler. These two pilots did, and I just thought that was grand. All of a sudden, instead of slogging through the stuff down there, I was riding over it. And I thought, this may not be too bad. And right after that, they said, okay, all you guys anybody want to sign up for flight school? And I was right in there with them. I said, sure enough, that sounds like, and I asked the two pilots, who I didn't know at the time, one of them was a student, probably, but I asked one of them, and I said, where do you guys, did anybody here be in Vietnam? Yep. The pilot said I had. I said, do you ever sleep in the jungle? He said, never, unless I crash or something. I thought, no sleeping in the jungle. This sounds better all the time. So I signed up. I mean, seriously, I just thought, and it incurred a longer commitment of 3 more years. But at the time, second lieutenants in infantry in 1968 did not do well in Vietnam. I mean, I know of 8 people from my company that were killed, and I know a few others that were severely wounded. But I don't know, the only reason I know about the 8 is because their names are on the wall, and I got a roster of my fellow classmates, and that's how I did that. Mm-hmm. I don't remember their names now, but I just know, I just wrote one of those. 8 went to the wall, that's what I know. And so.
Now, what was your attitude when you didn't go to the chemical corps?
I was just slightly ticked off, but not. I didn't have by that point. My expectations were not very high that I was going to get it. It's like the other guys were that didn't think. Pretty much were sure they were going to go to quartermaster, and they didn't. So I wasn't surprised. There was all these stories about Army promising this, Army promising that. And in 1968, I believe there was peace talks going on in Paris, I think, and we were all, thinking, oh, it'll be over. Well, unfortunately, I guess it wasn't. And it wasn't a surprise. If you think about what was going on, if you're paying any attention, some of our officers, TAC officers and our company commander, our TAC officers were just lieutenants. They hadn't been to Vietnam. But the company commander and the first sergeant had certainly been to Vietnam, and they would, if you'd ask them, they'd tell you a little bit, not about what they did, but what we thought, what they thought was going to happen, and why we probably were going to be infantry, and we were, pretty much.
So where'd you go to flight school?
Well, it's broken into 2 pieces then. Before I went to flight school,
Okay.
I got assigned. Well, I was assigned out of the basic training to the 24th Infantry Division, which at that time was based in Fort Riley, Kansas. But myself and a few other guys on either side of my name in the alphabet, which is how the Army does everything, we were sent to Fort Knox to Organizational Maintenance Officer School for, I think, 2 months.
What do you do there?
Organizational. We learned, well, every unit, infantry units have, and so do aviation units for that matter, have vehicles, like trucks, and some of them, and we learned about, maintenance as an officer, to be in charge of the maintenance of trucks and tanks and half-tracks and stuff like that that infantry units might have. So it was really good training, and then, we were on TDY, temporary duty from Fort Riley, which I never went to Fort Riley, because when I got out of maintenance school, then I went to flight school. And I first went to Fort Walters, Texas, where they had primary helicopter training. And that's where and that took, let's see here, I'm kind of track of the months. I think that was, I think I went in March, maybe 3 months, maybe it was 6 months, flight school was 6 months, I sort of lost track of that. But then I went to Fort Rucker, Alabama for the final training, which is still is the home of Army aviation, and it was booming in those days, I'll tell you. We had a lot of classes, a lot of helicopters. The officers club was a happening place, and all that kind of stuff, because there was a lot of people signed there. And met my wife there at the not at the officers club, but a blind date. A friend of mine was in my flight class, introduced me to his wife, knew her, and that's how we met. So it's just one of those military situations, So that wouldn't have ever met her had I not gone to flight school, that's for sure. So I spent 3 months at Fort Walters flying little helicopters around and getting the basics, and then going to Fort Rucker, and they put you in Hueys, and you learn to fly Hueys, hopefully. Most people did. So anyway, yeah.
And you got your pilot's wings.
Yep.
When?
I think it's August of '69. About a year later from when I got my commission. So
And what'd you do?
What?
What'd you do when you got your wings?
Well, we were on the whole time you're in flight school. The way the Army did it, you were on. I don't know why they did this, but I don't need to know why. They were on TDY to Vietnam, because once you signed up for flight school, you were going to Vietnam. So you got TDY pay even though you weren't in Vietnam, and flight pay. So, most of these guys, most of us were single and having a good time. A lot of Corvettes purchased in those days and stuff like that. Not me, but some people. Anyway, and at the end of flight school, everybody thinks we're going to Vietnam, and for reasons who knows what, some of us got sent to other places. In my case, I went to Fort Carson, Colorado, which was in an aviation unit for a little while, but they didn't really have any aviation units with infantry units then. This was the first division was based out of Fort Carson, and one of their brigades was right up on the DMZ in Vietnam. So for a while it was this loose helicopter thing, and then they assigned me as a first lieutenant by then to the 4th Infantry Brigade and that was kind of a made up brigade. It was mechanized infantry there in Fort Carson. And the 4th Infantry Brigade was a made-up unit from the Sunflower Brigade, the 69th Infantry Sunflower guys, which were activated out of Kansas because of Vietnam. And so few of those guys were left over that some of them got sent to Vietnam. Some of these reservists got dead, and they were about to wind down, and the ones they're going back to Kansas. So they put the 4th Brigade in there and made them active. And they usually don't have 4 brigades, but they did. And so at brigade headquarters, I was the aviation liaison officer, which didn't have any helicopters, so I got assigned. This is the piece of military things you would never think get in. So this is 1969. But then in 1969, late '69, we're starting to have some things called riots in the United States about the Vietnam War. Of course, most of me being in the military, I didn't know much about that except you read it in the news. So in the fall of '69, our brigade got assigned an operation called Garden Plot. I don't know why. Garden Plot was designed for active infantry to go with mechanized vehicles to go somewhere and quell riots in the United States. In other words, quell your own citizens from rioting. My job was to get the troops and the APC, which is Armored Personnel Carrier, from Fort Carson across the 4-lane highway, or interstate highway being 25, over to Peterson Field of the Air Force and load one of those on a C-141 or C-130. C-130 was smaller, of course, and it was a little tight getting the APC in the back of them. But I think we did it. So we practiced this. And I think when the Wounded Knee uprising occurred, I think that's the one. I sometimes laugh, or don't laugh, I kid around and say we were on call to go to Kent State, but I don't think that's correct. But I think we were on the tarmac, and we did have the APC loaded to go to Wounded Knee. And it's pretty serious stuff, because when you get there, you had live ammunition. And, it's like you wouldn't ever thought that ever happened. But we didn't go. It got settled. We took everything back to post, and that was the end of that. So, somewhere in that period, my commanding officer let me go back to Alabama to marry my wife. He told me if I could get to Alabama and back, and get married and get back in a week, it was okay, or something like that.
So, when did you get married?
When?
When?
December 30th, 1969.
Okay.
Are we going to get close on time? How are we doing? Okay. I do have to leave about 1:45 till 2.
Okay.
Okay, I didn't bring.
They have 45 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well,
Okay.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so then I did get orders to Vietnam out of Fort Carson in 1970s, July-ish time frame, and I ended up going to Vietnam then.
Tell me about going to Vietnam.
Well,
What did you think when you got orders?
Well, I'd always been mentally prepared to go, because I thought I was going to go right out of flight school, and then, when I went to Fort Carson, that was like I didn't know that was going to happen at any time. There was no question that we were going to go. I mean, Vietnam was hot, and me and just about everybody else, aviators were going to go, infantry people were going to go, and so I was just I was under no illusion I wouldn't go. I guess so. It wasn't really a surprise. So I mean, it wasn't like it was a fun thing to think about, but anyway, I just did. And so you get there. I was first lieutenant then, and you go to the 90th replacement place. What is it called? Depot or whatever it's called. The first person I ran into, or one of the first people I ran into in the mess hall, was a guy that had been in my OCS class, and he said, I don't remember his name's not important, but he said, "I can't believe it's you." And I said, "Well, who'd you think I was going to be?" He said, "We heard you got killed in Vietnam. Everybody, 2 or 3 other guys in your OCS class heard you were KI." And I said, "Well, not yet anyway." So, I mean, that's kind of spooky. I mean, it's kind of like, no, I'm not. And another good friend of mine, or a guy that I knew in OCS and went on to that maintenance school in Fort Dix, he had done his whole tour. This didn't happen exactly when I was there, but this other guy told me it happened there, and that the Viet Cong actually put a round in the 90th replacement depot, and this guy was killed after he just got his tour done. He was about ready to come home, and he got killed by a stray round. Maybe it wasn't stray. Anyway, whatever. Anyway, Tony, I can't remember his last name's not important, but it's like, oh my gosh. Anyway, so then I got assigned to aviation unit in Benoit, which is it's in the middle. Well, if you look at a map, it's just a tick from south of Saigon. There's a big Air Force base. Was a big Air Force base there at Benoit, and the aviation unit was adjacent to it. I mean, not on the Air Force base per se, but it had this great big. There had been quite a few helicopters there. Still were when I was there. There was like 3 or 4 companies. So I was in 118th Assault Helicopter Company.
118th Assault Helicopter.
118th AHC Thunderbirds. So this company, it was part of an aviation battalion, and that battalion was part of the aviation group. So it wasn't attached to any unit. not like First Cav or 24th. They all had their own, what do they call it? They had their own aviation, organic aviation, whatever that's called. But anyway, so we flew for whatever came down the pike, whatever the day, whatever the orders of your mission was. You might go fly for the 24th, you might fly for the 9th Infantry. Of course, we did fly for First Cav because they had their own pilots and aircraft and all that. At that time, so we flew right around there, and that was called, nobody knows when to talk.
Yeah.
That was called 3 Corps, and South Vietnam was divided into 4, 5.
I Corps, 2 Corps, 3 Corps.
I've got a map over there.
We were in I Corps.
Right, so I guess there was maybe 5. But I don't know anyway. Yeah, I think there was 4.
Yeah.
So 4 was the Delta, and we were north of the Delta, around Saigon, and pretty much that's where the 9th, 8th, 9th Infantry and the 24th Infantry were operating in at first, when I first got there. So, when you get in an aviation unit, you're a newbie, new pilot, and you may or may not have, you can't be, Hueys have 2 pilots, and one of them's a co-pilot, one's the aircraft commander, and it doesn't make a difference how experienced you are when you get in there. If you're just getting in country, you're not going to be the aircraft commander until the other guys decide you're good enough, because that makes sense, because they got the experience. So, a lot of the aviators, a lot of Army aviators, helicopter pilots were warrant officers. Maybe they were 20 years old, and maybe some of them were only 19. They'd gone to basic training and aviation school, and I was an old guy then, but maybe 24. But these pilots were great. I mean, it was a good move on the Army's part, because they were brash and had excellent skills, reflexes, and excellent pilots. No question about it. And so I flew for a while, and in the right seat, the helicopter was always the co-pilot. Left seat was always the aircraft commander. I don't know why. Instruments were all the same, but anyway, that's how it was. And you flew all kinds of different missions. We were doing combat assaults for the 9th and the 24th. Most of the stuff then was quiet. There weren't any. I have to say, I never. A hot LZ is one that you go into with enemy firing at somebody in there. Usually the helicopters coming in, because you're either dropping off troops or you're picking up troops. As far as I know, I never went into hot LZ.
What is a combat assault?
Oh, a combat assault is it's a maneuver. And it's all developed pretty much and perfected in Vietnam. And it's the whole idea of going out to some spot, in this case Vietnam, where you can land a helicopter, or in some cases they blew a hole in the jungle, and somebody decided that's where they need to insert troops on the ground. And so you go pick them up at a fire support base or someplace, and you get all briefed by and then one of the helicopters would do what's called command and control. And so you'd get up above the whole thing. You would know, and we did, since I was, by then eventually became a captain, and so I sometimes did combat assault. I did command and control, and we had special radio in the back. And usually it was a battalion, and usually the guy in the back was a battalion commander, and his radio, the guy that carried the radio, whatever he was. And they would they'd tell us where we wanted the people inserted, and we would call the ships, and they'd fly into the fire support base, get the troops on, take them out to that spot, and insert them into the jungle. If they thought there was, they usually thought there was enemy activity there, they wouldn't have been going out there in the first place. So the gunships, which were a separate platoon of the company, they would prep the area, which means they'd fire rounds in there, and then as the slicks were the helicopters carrying the troops, not gunned, except M60s on each side, as they were coming in, the gunships would be on each side firing on the jungle to suppress any enemy fire. And I guess, like I said, I guess they did a good job because I never knew of any that got fired at us. So, anyway, that's pretty much it. And then this usually lasted, sometimes they were only out there a day. Sometimes we go back to Fire Support Base and stay, and then later in the afternoon, we go back out and pick them up someplace else because they'd gone through the jungle. Sometimes the command and control guy would fly over, the pilots, the helicopter with the commander in it, with the battalion commander. We'd fly over the whole area, and I remember, well, they're the commander. He was extolling the troops to move forward and on the radio and giving them a bunch of crap. And my fellow pilot said, "Sir, if you'd really like to show them how it's done, we'd be glad to land you down there," which he got in trouble for that, but I thought it was appropriate. Anyway, the other guy was a warrant officer though, so they did stuff like that. But anyway, I thought it was right though. But anyway, then as the war started winding down, the 9th Infantry Division, the 24th, they went home to be replaced by Republic of Vietnam ARVNs. Republic of Vietnam, whatever they are, whatever ARVN stood for.
Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN.
Right.
ARVN.
ARVN, that's right, ARVN, that's what it was, yes. Well, now these guys had, an infantry person can tell you a lot more about this, but they all had their advisors, U.S. troops, advisors, and so we'd go get them and load them up and take them out into the jungle, just like we did our own troops. Same deal, same principle, same everything, except they didn't have the helicopters yet. They being the South Vietnamese, and insert them. And they were, let's just say, some of them weren't quite as bold about getting out of the aircraft as our American troops were, but anyway, that was just, sometimes the crew chief had the machine gunner, which was one was on one side of the aircraft and one was on the other, had to help him out a little bit. I'll just leave it at that, but I'm sure it just was one of those things. So we did that for a while, and then President Nixon was doing his Vietnamization, but then the country was getting really tired of the war, and so our units, and the helicopter units, started closing down, and going home, taking the banner and going home. So about 8 months into my tour of a year, there was a few of us that didn't have time to go, about 12 of us that didn't have enough time to go home, and so they put me as a captain in charge of about 12 warrant officers and a couple of officers, and we then became we became attached to the United States Air Force to train the Vietnamese Air Force pilots how to fly Hueys in Vietnam. Now, they'd already been to flight school in the United States, so they were pilots, and they were pretty good pilots, I have to say. But they didn't have any idea about tactics and stuff, and some of them need a little more polish. So we did that for a while, and I have to say, some of those pilots were really neat guys. Most of them were college educated, and we had a little language barrier, but most of them spoke enough English. I will just say one incident. I was flying left seat courses, aircraft commanders had a guy, I don't remember his name now, it's not important. I'll say I don't remember, Lieutenant Quang, I think, but it's not important. We're flying, he's got the controls, another helicopter's approaching. So, to avoid the midair, I said, whoa, up a little bit. He didn't do anything. I said, whoa. I said, whoa, goddammit. I didn't have to put that in, but I said, whoa. And then I grabbed the controls and avoided the midair, which of course is in everyone's best interest. And he said, I don't understand. I did not understand. Whoa, I don't know what that means. Of course he didn't know what it meant. Why? I felt so bad about that. I said, I'm sorry. But they had a lot of face. That's you had to treat them fairly, or if they and he was crushed that I took the helicopter away from him because he didn't see the impending midair, which is why I was getting excited. So anyway, just a little funny language thing. And then the last 2 months of my year tour, I got that was over, and I went to another fire support base called Bearcat, which was then I became an office assistant personnel officer and flew just a little bit. Nothing exciting. Came home.
You were in Vietnam how long?
A year, right up to the day almost. So I went in July 70 and got back in late July 71.
Have any contact with the local people?
You mean the Vietnamese? Actually, I had a pretty interesting experience with these hot rod. Now I shouldn't say that. Some of these senior guys, Vietnamese pilots in this, they had a company, and they had flown CH-34s, those big kind of looking ungainly things that had been over there a long time in Vietnam before the Hueys. Some of them were like, they had hours, I don't know how many hours, and so they were the commanders, and they were just putting up with this Huey stuff because they were senior captains and majors. And so they invited us to a wedding one Sunday. Oh, by the way, the Vietnamese never flew on Sunday. I always thought that was interesting. I thought we should have thought of that a long time ago. They would take the helicopters and use them for personal things like hunting and going to weddings. So they invited us to a wedding out in the country of one of the junior pilots, and we all piled in there, and off we go. They flew, the two senior guys, captain and major, and we were all passengers. And we go out there, and we land right outside the village, and we go to the wedding. I don't remember the wedding per se, but I remember we were then honored guests in the groom's home, which was just a little village with little thatched shack with a mud floor, and we all went in there and were served a meal of different delicacies that I'd never seen before, like cooked chicken feet and things like that. That's where I saw my first Vietnamese pig before they became popular in the United States. And the pig was just around on the floor, and anything that got thrown down there like chicken bones, it became pig food. And it was very clean. I mean, there was some liquor involved. I believed in the designated driver thing, even though I wasn't what it was. So I was pretty sure that these two pilot, captain and the major, they were celebrating a good bit. But they would not let us have the controls. It was their helicopter. Oh, I should have said, for this whole thing of Vietnamization, we didn't just give the Vietnamese our helicopters that had already been beaten up and flown and all that. They got brand new helicopters or brand new reconditioned helicopters. Well, I mean, I guess that makes sense. I don't know. But anyway, so their helicopters were in really, really good shape. The scary part was about that the mechanics were done by Air Force maintenance guys who did not necessarily know about helicopters, which made those of me and my fellow pilots that were associated with these Vietnamese quite nervous. And so, needless to say, we took our pre-flights very seriously because these guys were nice. These were American U.S. Air Force people, and they were nice guys, but they didn't know all the details about helicopters. I mean, Air Force had helicopters, a few Hueys. But these guys were like one guy told me, son, B-52 mechanic, I've seen one turbine, I've seen them all. I went, yeah, but it's not the same. There's other stuff. There's all these push and pull rods, you know. So, so that was probably the hairiest part, but I don't think we had any accidents. So it was mostly because I think the helicopters were brand new to start with, or like new. So anyway, we got back from the wedding, probably being flown by two guys pretty much under the influence. They didn't do anything scary or weird, but it was, it was spooky. They just do stuff like that. Anyway, so.
So what did you do when you came back to the States?
I had a year, when I signed up for flight school, they called it voluntary indefinite, so I had no idea how long I would be. I owed Uncle Sam. So I came back and they had a thing called, when you were getting reassigned, you could put down where you'd like to go, and nobody ever went there. But I put down Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri because it was close to my parents. And lo and behold, I went there. Well, it's basic training. It's a basic training facility. And so I go in there, and the signing officer said, "You going to stay in the Army?" I said, "I don't think so." "Well, you wouldn't want to be a commander of a base training." I said, "I don't think so." So he said, "Well, you pilots, we had a few aircraft." He said, "Well, you can't go out there. There's too many of those already that are in charge of just a few aircraft. So you really, I got this one spot for you, and it's called a personnel control facility. You can go up there with the legal team." I said, "Well, I'm not. I got a degree in biology. So this doesn't make any difference." So I learned how to be a defense officer for people, individuals, all men who'd gone AWOL or deserted or whatever. And that was a different experience. This personnel control facility was there in Fort Leonard Wood for the whole Fifth Army, I think. And so they brought people in from, Indiana, Illinois, people being men who had gone AWOL or deserted, same difference. And then they decided at this control facility how to process them. Some of them had been, the deserters, as a rule, went to the stockade, depending on what else they'd done. And so then I would go visit them. You talk about it. That's the only time I'd ever visited a prison, in my life, and hopefully last. But it's a pretty grim place. And you'd interview these guys, and they had the stories. And I've written a facsimile story because they all became pretty much the same. Well, there I was. I don't go into all that now, but that story of how I just had to go home and see Susie, or I had to go home and see Mama, or I had to go home because I need to go home. Well, And so I don't remember how many people I defended for AWOL, which is not a winning game. I want to say maybe 100, and I got one off because the military had goofed up his records. And really, I was not a career person, but it was hard for me to like these guys. I guess defense attorneys know what that's like, but I never had experience with that. So some of these guys are real sleazeballs. You really were, but you just did what you had to do.
Yes.
It's my job. And so I did that, and then after a little while with that, I became some other officer. I signed the papers whether they were going to get a special court-martial or a summary court-martial or Article 15, and then we metered those out. I actually, I could give summary court-martials, which I could actually give a person with a summary court-martial, I believe, 30 days in the stockade. I don't believe I ever did. Don't remember exactly. But most of those guys didn't have such egregious things. They messed up and they were trying to right themselves. And so one of them that I remember was a kid, and I didn't give him any hard time, and he was the cook at the personnel control facility. And man, I tell you, every time I went to mess hall, I got treated very decent. Considering it's mess hall food, but nonetheless,
And you were there how long?
About a year, because I got there in about July of '71, and about, I want to say August of '72, they said, okay, all officers need to report up this deal. And they said, okay, we're getting rid of, and there's I don't remember, some kind of auditorium, and they said, okay, we need to get rid of some officers. We got too many of the wars winding down. Anybody who wants to stay and who wants to go? And I was in the go group, so I got out pretty quick.
Now, were you given a discharge or just as an officer discharged?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When did you get your discharge?
The exact day, I want to say, it was August, but I don't remember the day of the month. But it was August of '72.
72.
Right.
What did you do after you left the Army?
I went back to school on the VA and got my master's in biology at Emporia State College in Kansas. And then I got a job. I had a degree in biology, wildlife biology, and a master's in biology. So then I was very fortunate to get a job with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, part of the Department of Interior. And 27 years later, I retired.
Where'd you work?
Where? Oh, I worked in Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and I went to Washington, then I worked in Florida.
What did you do with Fish and Wildlife?
What did I do?
Mm-hmm.
I was a biologist by training, and for many years we did field work. These field officers would go out and do evaluations of projects like the Corps of Engineers put in a reservoir. We'd go see what the damages might be to the fish and wildlife resources. A lot of report writing and field work and report writing. Pretty fun. And then I got to a point where for me to get promoted any further, I needed to decide if I wanted to be promoted, if I wanted to get a higher civil service rank, I needed to go into management. Either I made a big mistake then or I did the right thing. I haven't decided yet. So I became a manager of biologists and did that here in Oklahoma for a few years down in Tulsa. Then I went to Washington, D.C., and that was a whole other 3 years of inside the Beltway silliness. And then I went to Florida to work on the Everglades with a bunch of people, and that's where I retired.
When did you come to Bartlesville?
When?
Mm-hmm.
After I retired in June of 01, I retired and we moved up here in the fall, I think, the fall of 2001.
Why'd you come here?
Why? Because two reasons. My daughters, when we left Tulsa, my daughter stayed in Tulsa, is still there, and my parents then were living up in southeast Kansas where I was born, and so geographically, Bartlesville was about equidistant. I had a job then also, given a job after retire with the Nature Conservancy down in Tulsa. So I came here and then commuted to Tulsa to work for about 2 years, which is pretty good commute, but nothing like Washington, D.C. And so it was easy. So this was mostly because of the geography. We lived in Tulsa. We didn't, we just thought this would be better, and it turns out it was.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Would you join the Army again?
You know, I thought about that, particularly in preparation for this interview. You know, I was sort of forced into it by the draft. So in truth, and I probably wouldn't have. Now, in truth also, though, had I not done that, I wouldn't have met my wife, which is a big deal in my life, and then I would have not had any stories to tell like I do now, and I would have met some great people. So, you know, I guess I might do it if I knew, I don't know. I mean, you just don't know. I just wasn't like, I never wanted to be a career officer, particularly after I got in that personnel control facility and saw that mess. I thought, well, that's just, you know, the Army was in bad shape then, I think, pretty much. You know, a lot of drugs and stuff. So I guess I don't know how to answer that question. I just, no, you know, as a 1967, I was 23 or something, you know, would you want to go off in the Army as a college graduate? Heck no. I want to go out. I don't know. I was still single.
I'd like to do a word association.
Okay.
Give you some words and you give me your reaction.
Okay.
The first one is Ho Chi Minh.
Well, the first thing you think of is, or at least I do, is Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is nothing to do with nothing to do with the guy per se. He certainly was a skilled leader. I'm pretty sure he's the one that kicked the French out of Vietnam, South Vietnam. He was, he was instrumental or involved in the peace talks that I talked about in '68. I believe he was still alive then. And the more you read about him, the more you realize pretty savvy guy. I mean, there's more reason to. I mean, I guess I wouldn't want to say I admired him because of his politics, but I would admire him because of he obviously was a brilliant man as far as how to get things done.
I was reading when Roosevelt was first elected president in 32, took office 33. Mm-hmm. He thought France should give up French Indochina, Center Team. And they said the man best qualified is Ho Chi Minh to rule French Indochina.
Yeah.
But then he died, Truman came in. And
right. And all, yeah.
And
right. And that's something. No, he's qualified. He's probably a really bright guy.
And also, I have read and understood that he was a communist, but a nationalist first, communist second.
I think that's true. I think I've read that. Now that
he told China, "We'll take your aid, but you keep your soldiers in China."
Right. Yeah.
But when he saw the word communist, we just
Right. We automatically.
because he asked the U.S. for aid.
Yeah. Right.
But being the communists, we just
We
sort of
couldn't
threw
do
up our
that.
hands and
No.
backed off.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Very intelligent man.
Oh yeah, no question about it.
Yes, yes.
Smart, and good tech, really smart guy. So admire him.
Yes. Basic training.
Big, for me, a big eye opener, big challenge. I thought I was in really good shape, but physically, but I really wasn't. So I had to do some. I had some hard goes at learning how to run the mile with my combat boots on and all that stuff. So, but once I got over that, I got in good shape, and it was really, some of the people were just weird. I mean, they were just so much different than anybody I'd ever dealt with. And not all of them, like they weren't the brightest bulb in the pack, but you just had to deal with all that. So it was good training for life. It was.
AIT.
Same thing, good training for life, except it's more intense. I again learned about individuals in races, certain things you need to understand about people's views. That was a big training. That was a big learning for me. Puerto Ricans and Negroes, I had no clue, and I learned it some of it the hard way, but I learned it.
Yes. Flight school.
Challenging. Flying a helicopter takes a lot of different things at one time, and exhilarating. You're young, and lifting off and into the wild blue yonder is a rush every time, I think. But really good training, and I sometimes wished I'd have listened more when I should have been, but I mean, most of the time, I thought it was a really good experience.
118th Assault Helicopter Company.
Interesting. The whole thing about Vietnam was you go into a unit and you didn't know if the guy that you're flying with or you're having a beer with or whatever, he'd been there 2 days or 8 months before you until you got to know him. I mean, you couldn't tell because everybody was, was all mixed up. So you could have some guy. You could have some guy that'd been there 9 months or 10 months or almost ready to go home. You really didn't know until you got to know him, and he told you, because it was all about getting through 12 months, and getting home. But and then the whole warrant officer contingency was very interesting. There's some of those guys I still do a little bit email with. Some of it I just couldn't handle anymore. But they're a unique breed. They were then, and they still are. Some of them apparently.
Lyndon Johnson.
Well, like I said earlier, he just all of a sudden became president. But you remember some things. I don't know if I remember from then, or if I learned since. About what he did for civil rights and some of those kind of things, and how he was one of the most effective arm-twisting politicians to get things done. These days, we think, boy, he probably wouldn't even get elected. I don't know. It's hard to know. Those kind of guys are, Tip O'Neill and those kind of guys are. That's a bygone era apparently. And he also Vietnam affected him. The war and the dragging out of it and the casualties affected him emotionally and physically, I think, quite a bit. He took it all in here, and so I think he was a very compassionate person. I mean, he's a little bit rough around the edges, I guess, but hey, what the heck? He was obviously a caring person.
Yes. Richard Nixon.
Oh, Richard. Well, Vietnamization, getting us out of Vietnam. I don't know, maybe there's a better way to do it. it took me a long time to get over the 1975, I guess that's the right year, when we just got out, the people being evacuated off the embassy. Some of my probably Vietnamese helicopter pilot friends taking those helicopters out and dumping them out in the ocean and getting on ships. I don't know that was them, but I wouldn't be surprised. They were such doggone good pilots. And I thought of all the people, some of which I knew, that got men, some women, men that got killed for not. I've never gotten over that. And it affects me how I think about our military operations these days. And some we could name, but just doggone it, there's all those people that got their lives messed up. Some of them, of course, a lot of them get killed, but I mean, just that's not Richard Nixon's fault per se. But I guess I'll give him he did some things he shouldn't have done, no doubt. But he at least got us out of there, which would need to be out. Well, because he didn't have much choice. He was going to get hammered if he didn't.
Oh, yeah.
So it was time. It was past time.
Vietnam.
Well, I think to me, when I think of Vietnam, I think is, why in the world did we get started in the first place? And then why did we stay so long? I mean, to me, it was more than just my year experience. Every time I think about it, that's just a man. That's probably going to get recorded. But anyways, I don't have any bad feelings about it per se. I mean, I count myself fortunate that I went to flight school. I didn't have to hump the boonies, and if that's a bad thing or whatever, I feel huge amount of empathy and sympathy for people who did, and when we go out and pick those poor suckers up out of the jungle, I just wanted to hug them. But I didn't want to go back with them, and I don't mind saying that, but it was, the more I learn about it and all the politics of getting us in there, why do we go there in the first place? Who knows? I don't know. We never quite figured that out. And then once you get in, you can't bear to bring yourself, admit you failed and get out. It should have been a big learning thing for the United States. I'm not sure it was. I'm pretty sure it wasn't, actually. But I mean, I'm not a pacifist, but I'm certainly not a big. Just me personally, I was not an Iraq fan, and Afghanistan. I just have some real problems with those things. Just because of what my experience was in Vietnam and all the things I think about happening to people, and I just don't think we ought to step into those as lightly as we do.
That's right.
Anyway,
how do you want to be remembered?
I've heard you ask those questions to other people, and I always thought that's an interesting question, and I never thought about it myself. Just as somebody, as far as my military time, I ended up spending almost 5 years, which I never intended to do, that just tried his best to do the best job he could when he was there. And that's true of my whole career, but I mean, as far as the military service, I never really intended to be in flight school. And then when I got to flight school, I never really intended to do all the things I did, but I just do as good as you can with what you're dealt, and have some sympathy for your fellow man, and try to help other people out. And I think I've done that.
Yep. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think that's it.
Well, sir, this is an excellent interview.
Okay, good.
I want to thank you for your service and thank you for the interview.
Okay, glad
and
to do
again, this is November 13th, 2013. My name is Joe Todd. This has been an interview with Steve Forsythe in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Thank you.
Thank you.